The great chamber of the Galactic Council stood silent as Ambassador Vexter walked to the center platform. His blue skin rippled with patterns of confidence and pride. He carried a data device in his webbed hands. Today would mark the expansion of the Chronaxi Empire into a new sector. Today would be remembered as a great achievement. He activated the holographic display, and a small blue planet appeared floating above the platform. The planet orbited a yellow star in a quiet arm of the galaxy. The world looked peaceful and beautiful with its oceans and green countenance. Ambassador Vexter began his presentation with a strong voice. The translator devices worn by all council members converted his clicks and whistles into their native languages. He spoke of resources and opportunities. He talked about the primitive inhabitants who called themselves humans. His scouts had spent months observing this world from a distance. They had intercepted communications and studied the technological level of the species. The findings were clear and simple. These humans had barely achieved light-speed travel. Their fastest ships were slow and clumsy. Their weapons were based on simple kinetics and early energy systems. They possessed nuclear weapons, but these were crude and limited. The Chronaxi military could easily overwhelm such basic defenses. The holographic display changed to show images of human cities and populations. Vexter explained that the humans numbered about 8 billion individuals. They were divided into multiple nations and governments. This division made them weak. A united response would be impossible. The Chronaxi could establish control over the major population centers within weeks. The humans would have no choice but to accept their new position in the Empire. Some might resist at first, but resistance would be brief and ineffective. The planet would become a valuable colony world. Its resources would fuel Chronaxi expansion for generations. Council Representative Thala began to glow with a red warning color. Her crystalline body vibrated as she prepared to speak. She was one of the oldest members of the council, and her wisdom was respected. She asked about the cultural assessment protocols. The standard procedures required a deep study of any species before contact. Understanding their history and psychology was essential. Military capability was only one factor. A species that seemed weak in technology might possess other strengths. Had the Chronaxi completed the full assessment, or only the military survey? Vexter waved one webbed hand dismissively. He explained that full protocols were designed for potential member species. These humans were not being invited to join galactic civilization. They were being absorbed into the Chronaxi Empire. The situation was different. Military assessment was sufficient for this purpose. The humans had only recently sent probes beyond their solar system. They had one small space station and a few orbital platforms. Their military forces were divided among their various nations. The technology gap was enormous. The Chronaxi possessed energy shields and plasma weapons. They had faster-than-light travel and advanced sensors. The humans were still using chemical rockets for most of their space operations. Elder Coordinator Xiphis raised several of his long, thin appendages. His ancient eyes studied the holographic images with concern. He had served on the council for over 2 centuries. He had witnessed first contact scenarios go wrong many times. Something about this situation troubled him deeply. He began to speak in his slow, careful manner. He mentioned that his staff had intercepted some of the human data transmissions. The content was disturbing in its implications. Human entertainment seemed obsessed with warfare and conflict. Their historical records showed an unbroken chain of wars stretching back thousands of years. Their fiction was filled with stories of survival against impossible odds. They seemed to have an unusual relationship with violence and competition. Vexter interrupted with a laugh that his translator rendered as amused chirping. He called this primitive aggression. Many species went through violent phases in their development. The humans were simply at that stage of evolution. Once they encountered a superior force, they would recognize their position. They would submit like all other primitive species had submitted. The Chronaxi had absorbed 17 worlds in the past 3 centuries. The pattern was always the same. Initial resistance followed by acceptance followed by integration. The humans would be no different. Their violent nature would work against them. They would waste time fighting among themselves while the Chronaxy established control. The council chamber filled with murmuring voices and translated sounds. Various representatives expressed opinions in their native forms of communication. Some agreed with Vexther, while others shared Zipha's concerns. The debate continued for nearly an hour. Arguments were made on both sides. Dela insisted on waiting and conducting proper studies. Vexther argued that delay was unnecessary and costly. The resources of Earth were needed for Chronaxy expansion plans. Other empires might notice the planet and make their own claims. Speed was essential. Finally, the vote was called. The council followed its ancient procedures. Each representative indicated their position through their species-specific methods. Lights flickered and sounds echoed through the chamber. When the count was complete, the result was clear. The Chronaxy had followed the minimum legal requirements. Their claim to Earth was recognized under Expansion Clause 7 of the Galactic Charter. No formal objection had received enough support to block the action. Vexther had won his argument through procedure and protocol. The ambassador bowed to the council in the Chronaxy manner. His skin rippled with satisfied purple patterns. He announced that the Chronaxy Armada would depart within 2 standard days. 300 warships would enter the human solar system. They would establish positions around Earth and broadcast demands for surrender. The humans would be given a brief time to respond. If they refused, then targeted strikes would eliminate their military capabilities. Casualties would be minimized where possible, but resistance would not be tolerated. The operation would be swift and professional. Elder Coordinator Ziphis watched the ambassador leave the chamber. His ancient mind was troubled by dark thoughts. He had seen this pattern before. A powerful species encountering a seemingly weak one. Assumptions made based on limited information. Confidence built on military superiority. It rarely ended as cleanly as the aggressors expected. Something about the humans bothered him greatly. Their endless wars and survival stories suggested a mindset that would not submit easily. A species that had fought itself for thousands of years would not suddenly become peaceful when threatened. They would fight. The question was how effectively they could fight. Thala approached Ziphis as the chamber emptied. Her crystalline form pulsed with worried orange light. She asked what they should do. The decision had been made and the fleet would depart soon. Ziphis considered carefully before responding. He suggested they prepare observers to monitor the situation. He also suggested they quietly alert the rapid response fleet. His instincts told him this would not be the simple conquest Vexther expected. The humans were about to receive a terrible shock. First contact with hostile aliens would change their civilization forever. But the Chronaxy might also be in for a surprise. Sometimes the prey turned out to be a predator. The 2 council members departed through separate exits. Behind them, the holographic image of Earth continued to rotate slowly in the empty chamber. The blue planet looked so peaceful and vulnerable. No one watching could have guessed what was about to unfold. The Chronaxy fleet prepared for departure. Their crews were confident and eager. They expected an easy victory and quick glory. They had no idea they were about to encounter something the galaxy had never seen before. They had no idea they were about to learn what happened when you threatened humanity's homeworld. The countdown had begun, and neither side fully understood what was coming. Admiral Kyle Preston stood perfectly still on the bridge of the USS Defiant. His eyes remained locked on the main display screen. The sensors showed 300 contacts appearing near Jupiter's orbit. Each contact represented a warship of unknown origin and capability. The readings were unlike anything humanity had ever detected before. The vessels used technology that made human engineering look primitive. Energy signatures pulsed across the spectrum. Weapon systems were clearly active and charged. This was not a peaceful exploration fleet. This was an invasion force. Lieutenant Sophie Martinez worked frantically at her station. Her fingers moved across the controls with practiced speed. She was processing the incoming transmission from the alien vessels. The ship's artificial intelligence was attempting to translate the message. Mathematical patterns suggested a universal language protocol. The computer worked through probability matrices and linguistic structures. After 2 minutes of processing, the translation appeared on her screen. She read it twice to make sure she understood correctly. Then she looked up at the Admiral with fear in her eyes. Sophie reported that the translation was complete. The message was a demand for immediate and unconditional surrender. The aliens identified themselves as representatives of the Chronaxi Empire. They claimed Earth as a colony world under something called Galactic expansion rights. Humanity had 30 standard days to evacuate the planet. Resistance would be met with overwhelming force. Military assets would be destroyed. Cities would be occupied. The human species would be relocated to designated zones. Compliance was mandatory and non-negotiable. Kyle felt anger burning in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. He had spent 20 years in the United States Navy. He had commanded vessels through 2 major conflicts and dozens of smaller operations. He had faced enemy fire and impossible situations. He had watched good people die following his orders. Every experience had taught him the same lesson. Bullies only understood strength. Threats only worked on those who chose to be intimidated. These aliens had made a terrible mistake. They had threatened Earth without understanding who they were threatening, the Admiral ordered Sophie to open a communication channel. She worked her controls and confirmed the channel was active. Kyle stepped forward and spoke in a clear, strong voice. His Texas accent became more pronounced as it always did when he was truly angry. He identified himself as Admiral Kyle Preston of the United Earth Defense Force. He stated clearly that the aliens had entered human territory with armed vessels and issued threats against humanity's homeworld. He gave them 30 seconds to begin withdrawing their forces. If they refused, then Earth would consider this an act of war. The main screen flickered, and an alien face appeared. The creature had blue, amphibious skin and large, dark eyes. Its mouth moved in strange ways as it spoke. The translator rendered the sounds into English. The alien identified itself as Ambassador Vexter. It spoke with obvious amusement and condescension. It explained that the humans misunderstood their position. The Chronaxi possessed 300 advanced warships. Their scans showed humans had only 12 primitive vessels. The technology gap was insurmountable. Surrender was the only logical option. Resistance would result in unnecessary casualties. Kyle smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. He told the ambassador that there had been a fundamental misunderstanding. The Chronaxi had made a critical assumption about humanity. They had assumed that humans would be afraid. They had assumed that facing superior numbers would make humans surrender. They had no idea how wrong they were. Kyle looked at Sophie and gave a single nod. She pressed a series of commands, and the trap was sprung. The USS Defiance weapon systems came online in a cascade of power. Every military satellite orbiting Earth activated simultaneously. Orbital defense platforms that had been silent and hidden suddenly blazed with energy signatures. Hidden bases on the moon powered up their railgun batteries. Automated defense stations throughout the asteroid belt began moving into attack positions. Mars colonies activated their missile silos. The Outer System Defense Grid initialized its targeting protocols. Within seconds, the tactical display showed over 2,000 armed platforms ready for combat. The transformation shocked the Chronaxi fleet. Their sensors had detected only a handful of human vessels. Now they faced a distributed defense network that covered the entire solar system. The humans had been hiding their true capabilities. They had let the Chronaxi believe Earth was defenseless. Every satellite and platform had been designed to appear civilian until activated. The deception was complete and devastating. Kyle spoke again, and his voice was cold as ice. He told Vexter that humanity had been preparing for this moment for 50 years. The moment humans achieved faster-than-light travel, they had made a terrible assumption. They assumed hostile aliens existed somewhere in the galaxy. They assumed first contact might be violent. So they built weapons and defense systems in secret. They united their nations under a single command structure. They turned their entire solar system into a fortress. Every nation on Earth had contributed resources and technology. Old enemies had become allies, facing a common threat. The Chronaxi had just discovered what humanity could achieve when, united by fear and anger, the Admiral gave the Chronoxy 10 seconds to start retreating. He promised they would not get another warning. The alien ambassador's face showed confusion and disbelief. Vexthor apparently decided this was a bluff. The Chronoxy fleet opened fire first. Plasma bolts and energy beams crossed the distance between Jupiter and the inner system. The battle of the solar system began with thunder and fury. Human defensive systems responded instantly. Point defense lasers intercepted incoming fire. Energy shields that the Chronoxy thought humans didn't possess flared into life. Railguns fired solid projectiles at incredible velocities. Missiles accelerated at speeds that would crush organic pilots. Nuclear weapons detonated in precise patterns to maximize damage. Experimental weapons that violated galactic treaties were deployed without hesitation. Humanity fought with every tool and trick they had developed. The battle was nothing like the Chronoxy expected. Human pilots flew attack patterns that should have killed them from acceleration forces. Their vessels absorbed damage that should have destroyed them. When conventional weapons failed, they resorted to ramming. Damaged ships continued fighting until they were completely disabled. Escape pods launched and then turned around to kamikaze into enemy vessels. The humans fought with a fury that seemed insane. Fighter squadrons led by Commander Jake Sullivan tore into Chronoxy formations. The pilots were outnumbered, but refused to retreat. They used the debris field and planetary gravity wells to their advantage. They lured enemy ships into ambushes. They sacrificed themselves to save their wingmates. Every pilot knew what was at stake. Earth hung vulnerable behind them. Failure meant the end of everything they loved. So they fought like cornered animals, because that's exactly what they were, Captain. Nina Rodriguez commanded the orbital defense station above North America. When Chronoxy ships broke through the outer defenses, she ordered her crew to redirect all power to weapons. Life support failed, but the guns kept firing. Oxygen levels dropped dangerously low. Her crew wrapped cloth around their faces and kept working. They fired until the enemy vessels were destroyed or driven off. Only then did they restore life support and breathe again. Ground-based installations fired with precision and determination. Railgun operators on the moon worked until their equipment overheated. Scientists at the Mars Research Colony converted their mining lasers into makeshift weapons. Asteroid miners rigged their extraction charges to serve as proximity mines. Every human in the solar system became a soldier defending their species. After 6 brutal hours, the Chronoxy fleet broke. Half their vessels were destroyed or disabled. Survivors retreated beyond Neptune, trailing atmosphere and debris, their communications channels filled with panicked reports. They called their homeworld begging for instructions. They described weapons that shouldn't exist and tactics that seemed suicidal. They reported facing an enemy that preferred death to surrender. Kyle watched the enemy flee and felt no satisfaction. This was just the beginning. The Chronoxy had revealed that hostile aliens existed. They had proven that Earth needed to be stronger. He ordered Sophie to contact Geneva immediately. The United Earth government needed to mobilize everything. If the Chronoxy wanted a war, then humanity would give them a war they would never forget. The message went out to every nation and colony. Humanity was going to the stars. They were going armed. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within hours of the battle. Representatives from 200 species gathered in the Great Chamber. The atmosphere was tense and filled with shocked disbelief. Live feeds from the battle of the solar system had flooded the galactic communication networks. Every civilization with receiver technology had watched the engagement. What they witnessed challenged everything they understood about emerging species and first contact protocols. Elder Coordinator Ziphis called the session to order with visible distress. His normally calm demeanor had vanished completely. His appendages trembled as he activated the central holographic display. The recording began to play, and the chamber fell into absolute silence. The assembled representatives watched as human vessels engaged in maneuvers that should have been impossible. The G-forces involved would liquefy most organic species. Yet the humans endured and kept fighting. Their ships absorbed damage that would cripple Chronoxy vessels and continued operating. When weapons failed, they used their ships as weapons themselves. Ambassador Vexler sat apart from the main assembly. His skin had turned a sickly gray color that indicated deep shame among his species. His confident patterns had disappeared entirely. He stared at the display showing his fleet's defeat with hollow eyes. This was supposed to be a simple conquest. The assessment had promised an easy victory. 300 advanced warships against primitive defenders should have resulted in overwhelming Chronaxi dominance. Instead, half his fleet was destroyed, and the rest had fled in panic. The recording continued showing weapon systems that violated multiple galactic treaties. Humans deployed kinetic kill vehicles at relativistic speeds. The projectiles punched through Chronaxi shields like they didn't exist. Nuclear weapons detonated in patterns that suggested advanced tactical coordination. Directed energy weapons carved through armor plating with terrifying efficiency. Experimental plasma systems that most species considered theoretical were being used in active combat. The technology gap was not what the Chronaxi had reported. Tala's crystalline form pulsed with angry red light. She had war. Ned, against this action? She had insisted on complete cultural assessment. Council had ignored her concerns and approved the invasion based on minimal information. Now they faced the consequences of that decision. She activated her own display and new images appeared throughout the chamber. These showed Earth's history in brutal detail. Ancient armies numbering hundreds of thousands clashing in primitive warfare. Medieval sieges lasting years. Industrial age conflicts that killed millions. Nuclear weapons capable of sterilizing continents. Chemical and biological agents designed to maximize suffering. The assembled representatives watched in growing horror as humanity's timeline unfolded. War after war after war, stretching back thousands of years. Every century brought new conflicts and new weapons. The humans fought over territory and resources and ideology and religion. They fought over insults and pride and ancient grievances. Sometimes they fought simply because fighting was what they knew. Their entire civilization had been shaped by endless competition and violence. Peace was the exception, while conflict was the norm. Tala spoke with barely controlled fury. She explained that humans possessed over 15,000 years of documented warfare. Their archaeological records suggested even older conflicts before written history. They had survived multiple extinction-level events including ice ages and pandemics. Had nearly destroyed themselves with nuclear weapons during something called the Cold War, yet they survived every catastrophe and emerged stronger. Their ability to adapt and innovate under pressure was unprecedented in galactic records. A small mammalian delegate named Pix raised a tentative paw. His voice was nervous and uncertain. He suggested that surely the humans would calm down now. The Chronaxi had retreated, and the immediate threat was over. Perhaps the situation could be resolved through diplomacy and reparations. The humans would see that the invasion was a mistake. They would accept apologies and compensation. Things could return to normal. The display changed to show new footage recorded just hours after the battle ended. The images showed massive industrial complexes on Earth converting from civilian to military production. Factories that built ground vehicles now produced armored personnel carriers. Shipyards that constructed cargo vessels were being retooled for warship construction. Chemical plants shifted to explosive manufacturing. Electronics facilities began making military-grade sensors and computers. The transformation was happening with incredible speed and coordination. More images showed recruitment centers in every major human city. Lines of volunteers stretched for blocks. Young people were signing up to join military forces in numbers that shocked the observers. The humans were not celebrating their defensive victory. They were preparing for offensive operations. Training facilities were being expanded. Military academies were accelerating their programs. Veterans were being recalled to active service. The entire species was mobilizing for war. Xiphis spoke with a grave tone. He explained that the humans were not defending anymore. They were preparing to invade. The Chronaxi had not just attacked their world. They had revealed that hostile alien species existed in the galaxy. Humanity now knew they were not alone. Their first contact with alien life had been an attempted conquest. Every human fear about dangerous outsiders had been confirmed. The species was responding the only way their history had taught them. They were arming themselves and preparing to strike first before anyone else could threaten them. Another delegate tried to suggest mediation. Surely the council could explain that the Chronaxi action was unauthorized. They could offer friendship and alliance. The humans would understand that not all species were hostile. Diplomacy could resolve this situation before it escalated further. The galaxy had protocols for exactly this kind of misunderstanding. Dala activated another recording. This one showed a human military leader named General Chris Donovan giving a public address. His face was hard and his eyes were cold. He spoke directly to cameras broadcasting across Earth. He described the attempted invasion and the successful defense. Then he announced something called Protocol Fortress. United Earth government was implementing total militarization. Defense spending would increase by 500%. Colonization of the solar system would accelerate. Scientific research would focus on military applications. Humanity would expand their territory and strengthen their defenses. No alien species would ever threaten Earth again. The general spoke directly to the Chronaxi Empire. His words were clear and simple. The Chronaxi had started this war. Humanity would finish it. Earth forces would hunt down every Chronaxi vessel. They would strike Chronaxi worlds and bases. Would make an example that would terrify the entire galaxy. Any species that threatened humanity would face total destruction. The message was not a negotiating position. It was a declaration of extermination. The council chamber remained silent after the recording ended. The implications were devastating. A new species had entered galactic civilization through violence. Their first experience with aliens had been hostile. Now they viewed every unknown species as a potential enemy. They were mobilizing their entire civilization for war. Their industrial capacity and population size meant they could sustain military operations indefinitely. Their history of warfare meant they understood combat better than most peaceful species. They were about to become everyone's problem. Vexler finally spoke in a broken voice. He asked what his people had done. The conquest was supposed to add territory to the empire. Instead, they had awakened something terrible. His species had given humanity a reason to expand into the stars with weapons ready. The Chronaxi had turned a peaceful species into a threat. Xiphus corrected him with bitter emphasis. The humans were never peaceful. They had been fighting each other because they had no one else to fight. Their wars had been limited to their own planet. The Chronaxi had given them external enemies. Now humanity would direct all their violent creativity outward. They would view every species as a potential threat requiring preemptive action. The galaxy had just gained a new apex predator. Thala insisted they must establish diplomatic contact immediately. They needed to explain that the Chronaxi did not represent galactic civilization. They had to convince humans that peaceful coexistence was possible. If humanity continued on this path, they would destabilize the entire political structure. Wars could erupt across multiple sectors. Balance of power would collapse. Xiphus agreed, but his tone held little hope. He explained they were no longer dealing with a primitive species requesting membership. They were dealing with a militarized civilization that had been given reason to trust no one. The humans had spent 3 months since achieving faster-than-light travel, preparing for exactly this scenario. They had hidden weapons throughout their solar system. They had unified their fractured governments. They had been expecting hostile first contact and had planned accordingly. Convincing them to stand down would be nearly impossible. The council members looked at each other with growing fear. Political alliances would need to be reconsidered. Defense budgets would need to increase. Border patrols would need to be strengthened. Every species would now need to account for this new variable. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage. It arrived angry and armed and ready to fight anyone who looked threatening. The Chronaxi invasion had changed everything. The galaxy would never be the same. 3 months passed since the Battle of the Solar System, and the Chronaxi Empire began experiencing strange problems. Border patrol ships disappeared without sending distress signals. Supply convoys scheduled to arrive at colonies never appeared at their destinations. Listening posts established on remote asteroids went silent without explanation. Mining operations reported equipment failures and communication disruptions. At first, these incidents seemed random and unconnected. The Chronaxi military command dismissed them as technical malfunctions or natural phenomena, but the pattern continued and grew worse each week. Commander Vexenol stood in the command center of Border Station 7 studying reports with increasing concern. He was a career military officer with 30 years of experience. His instincts told him something was very wrong. The incidents were not random at all. Someone was systematically dismantling the Chronaxi outer defense network. Ships vanished along predictable patrol routes. Convoys disappeared at vulnerable transition points between systems. Listening posts were destroyed in order from the most isolated to the more connected. This was not accident or malfunction. This was deliberate military action. The intelligence officer approached with fresh data from recovered debris fields. His skin flickered with nervous yellow patterns that indicated fear and uncertainty. The analysis was complete, and the results were disturbing. The weapon signatures matched Earth's technology. Human forces were responsible for the attacks, but the technology had advanced significantly since the initial battle. The weapons were more powerful and more sophisticated. The stealth systems were beyond anything that Chronaxi had encountered before. Human ships were masking thermal signatures and electromagnetic emissions and even gravitational distortions simultaneously. Vexenol felt cold dread spreading through his body. He demanded to know how this was possible. 3 months was not enough time for such technological advancement. Species needed decades or centuries to make such progress. The intelligence officer explained that human history showed a different pattern. During one of their global wars, they advanced from primitive propeller aircraft to jet engines in just 6 years. They developed nuclear weapons from theoretical concepts to deployed arsenal in less than 4 years. When threatened, humanity innovated at speeds that defied normal technological progression. They were not following the standard development curves that other species used. They were skipping entire stages through desperate creativity and relentless focus. The conversation was interrupted by blaring alarms throughout the station. Sensors detected multiple contacts appearing at the edge of weapons range. The tactical display lit up with 12 vessel signatures. They had appeared from nowhere despite the Chronaxi early warning systems. One moment the space was empty, and the next moment, human warships were in attack formation. The vessels were larger than the ships from the first battle. Their designs were angular and aggressive. Every line suggested violence and purpose. The lead human ship opened a communication channel. A young woman appeared on the view screen. She identified herself as Captain Linda Hayes of the Earth Defense Force. She looked calm and professional. Her eyes were steady and her voice was controlled. She stated that she wanted to discuss terms. Vexenol felt his confidence returning despite his earlier concerns. 12 ships against his border fleet of over 50 vessels. The humans were either desperate or insane. He asked what kind of terms she thought she could demand from such a weak position. Linda smiled slightly, and the expression was not friendly. She explained that in the past 3 months, human forces had destroyed or captured 18 Chronaxi vessels. They had eliminated 7 listening posts and mapped the entire border defense network. They had accomplished this without losing a single ship. Their stealth technology allowed them to strike and withdraw before the Chronaxi could respond. Human intelligence now possessed complete information about Chronaxi military deployments and communication protocols. The balance of power was not what Vexenol assumed. The captain continued speaking with cold precision. She outlined the terms that humanity was offering. The Chronaxi Empire would withdraw all forces to within their core systems. They would pay substantial reparations for the attempted invasion of Earth. They would provide complete intelligence on all hostile species in the galaxy. They would share technological information about faster-than-light travel and energy generation. In exchange, humanity would not systematically dismantle the Chronaxi Empire world by world. Refusal would result in continued military operations until the Empire collapsed completely. Vexenol called her bluff immediately. She had 12 ships, and he had 50. The humans did not have the forces necessary to threaten the entire empire. Their industrial base was limited to one solar system. The Chronoxy controlled 30 star systems with established colonies and shipyards. The math was simple and obvious. Linda nodded to someone off-screen, and the tactical display changed dramatically. Hundreds of new contacts appeared on the sensors. They surrounded the Chronoxy border in every direction. The stealth systems deactivated simultaneously, revealing the true size of the human fleet. Battleships and carriers and destroyers and cruisers filled the display. They had been there the whole time, waiting and watching. The Chronoxy sensors had detected nothing until the humans chose to reveal themselves. The technology gap had reversed completely. Linda continued her presentation without emotion. She explained that the 12 visible ships were just the forward elements. The main expeditionary fleet consisted of over 300 vessels. Back on Earth, the industrial conversion was complete. 40% of human manufacturing capacity now produced military equipment. Shipyards orbited Mars and the Moon and several asteroid bases. Construction platforms operated beyond Pluto, building even larger vessels. The United Earth government had mobilized 20 million people into active military service. Another 100 million worked in support roles, building weapons and ships and supplies. The captain described weapons that made Vexenal's tactical training seem obsolete. Humans had weaponized asteroids by attaching engines and guidance systems. Their merchant fleet had been converted into auxiliary military vessels. They had developed kinetic weapons that struck with the force of nuclear explosions. Their energy weapons could burn through Chronoxy shields in seconds. Experimental systems that violated galactic warfare conventions were in active deployment. All of this had been accomplished in 3 months. Linda asked the commander to imagine what humanity would have in 1 year or 5 years or 10 years. Vexenal struggled to process the information. This was impossible. One planet should not be able to project this much military power. The logistics alone should take years to organize. Linda seemed to read his thoughts. She explained that humanity had one advantage the Chronoxy did not understand. Humans knew how to hate efficiently. For thousands of years they had practiced warfare against each other. They understood supply chains and industrial mobilization in total war. When the Chronoxy attacked Earth, they united 8 billion people under a single purpose. Every human now understood that aliens existed, and some of them were hostile. The species had responded with complete commitment to survival. The communication ended abruptly. The human ships began patrol patterns that demonstrated complete control of the region. Vexenal stared at the tactical display, feeling his world collapse. His communications officer reported similar situations in 11 other border sectors. Human fleets had appeared everywhere, making identical demands. The Chronoxy military was surrounded and outmatched. He ordered his staff to contact the homeworld immediately. The Empire needed to negotiate before the situation became worse. The humans were not interested in conquest or subjugation. They wanted security and revenge. If the Chronoxy refused terms, then humanity would dismantle the Empire piece by piece. Vexenal had seen enough battles to recognize when defeat was inevitable. Pride and honor meant nothing against overwhelming force. Back on Earth, General Chris Donovan reviewed operational reports from all active theaters. The campaign was proceeding ahead of schedule. Human forces controlled Chronoxy border space completely. Intelligence gathering was excellent. The enemy was demoralized and fractured. Phase 2 could begin within weeks. His aide, Colonel Greg Simmons, entered the office with new information. The Galactic Council had requested a formal meeting. They wanted to mediate between humanity and the Chronoxy Empire. Chris considered this development carefully. Mediation meant the Council was taking Earth seriously as a power. That was good. But humanity needed to negotiate from maximum strength. The Chronoxy had taught an important lesson about galactic politics. The strong did as they wished, while the weak suffered. Earth would never be weak again. If that meant becoming the species others feared, then so be it. Fear bred respect, and respect bred security. Greg expressed concern about the aggressive posture. Some analysts worried humanity was becoming what they fought against. Chris understood the concern, but rejected the conclusion. Humanity was not conquering innocent species or enslaving populations. They were making an example of one aggressor to deter all others. Every civilization in the galaxy needed to understand that Earth was untouchable. The cost of learning that lesson had to be high enough that no one else would test it. The Chronaxi Empire would serve as that lesson, the negotiation chamber on the neutral station of Kepler. The station was designed to accommodate hundreds of different species. The architecture allowed for varying gravity levels and atmospheric conditions. Environmental controls maintained separate zones for beings who breathed different gases or required different temperatures. Today, the chamber hosted representatives from across the known galaxy. This meeting would determine the future of interstellar politics and possibly prevent a war that could consume multiple sectors. On one side of the chamber sat the Galactic Council representatives. Elder Coordinator Xiphus occupied the central position with his many appendages arranged in a posture of formal authority. Ambassador Thala stood beside him with her crystalline body pulsing a neutral blue color. Other council members filled the remaining seats representing the established order of galactic civilization. They had governed interstellar relations for over 1,000 years. Their protocols and procedures had maintained relative peace across 200 member species. Opposite the council sat the human delegation. Secretary of Interstellar Affairs Helen Park led the group with calm professional confidence. She had spent her entire career preparing for eventual alien contact. Years of training and study had made her an expert in diplomacy and negotiation. Beside her sat Admiral Kyle Preston in his military uniform decorated with medals from the recent battles. General Chris Donovan occupied the third seat, looking every bit the warrior he was. Behind them stood various advisors and technical experts, ready to provide information as needed. In a separate isolated section sat the Chronaxi delegation. Ambassador Vexther was present but diminished. His once confident skin patterns had faded to dull gray. Other Chronaxi officials sat with him, sharing his humiliation. Their empire had been brewed. HT to the negotiating table by force. 3 months of military defeats had shattered their pride and confidence. They were here to accept terms, not to negotiate from strength. Xiphus opened the proceedings with formal ritual words. He acknowledged the conflict between the Chronaxi Empire and human civilization. He stated that the council had agreed to serve as neutral mediator. The goal was to establish peace and prevent further violence. He asked Vexther if the Chronaxi Empire accepted responsibility for initiating hostilities against Earth. The question was procedural, but the answer would establish legal precedent. Vexther spoke with visible difficulty. His translator rendered his clicks and whistles into multiple languages simultaneously. He acknowledged that the Chronaxi had attacked Earth without provocation. The invasion had violated the spirit of peaceful coexistence. His empire accepted responsibility for starting the conflict. The admission was painful but necessary. The Chronaxi had no choice but to accept blame and hope for mercy. The Elder Coordinator turned to the human delegation. He asked if Secretary Park accepted the Council's role as mediator in this dispute. Helen leaned forward and spoke clearly. She stated that humanity accepted mediation, but with important clarifications. Earth had not asked to be introduced to galactic civilization through violence. Humans had not requested first contact with hostile aliens. The Chronaxi made choices, and now everyone had to live with the consequences. Her tone was polite but firm. Xiphus nodded and presented the Council's proposed terms. The Chronaxi would pay substantial reparations to Earth over a period of 20 years. They would withdraw all military forces from the border regions near human space. They would provide technological information about galactic navigation and communication systems. In exchange, humanity would cease military operations and return captured Chronaxi personnel. The terms were generous and designed to satisfy both parties. The Council considered them fair and reasonable. Helen spoke one word that echoed through the chamber. She said no. The simple refusal shocked the Council members. Thala's crystalline form flickered with surprise and confusion. She asked why the terms were insufficient. The reparations were substantial. The territory concessions were significant. The technology transfers were valuable. What more could humanity want from this situation? The secretary activated a holographic display that peered throughout the chamber. She showed data collected over the past 3 months. The information revealed a disturbing pattern in galactic history. Smaller species had been subjugated by larger empires. Weaker civilizations had been absorbed or destroyed. Territorial expansion happened regularly with minimal consequences. The Chronoxy attack on Earth was not an isolated incident. It was part of a systemic problem in how the galaxy operated. Helen explained that humanity had reviewed every record they could access. The conclusion was unavoidable. Galactic civilization operated on power dynamics. The strong imposed their will, while the weak accepted their fate. The Council had protocols, but those protocols had not prevented the Chronaxy invasion. Rules only mattered when someone enforced them. The system was broken, and humanity refused to simply accept the status quo. She expanded the display to show humanity's proposal. Earth was introducing something called the Mutual Defense Compact. Any species, regardless of size or technology level, could join. Members agreed to defend each other against aggression. An attack on one member would be treated as an attack on all members. Humanity would provide military training and defensive technology to members who needed assistance. Economic cooperation would strengthen all participants. The compact would operate outside Council oversight as an independent alliance, Vexter objected immediately despite his weakened position. He argued that creating a military alliance outside Council authority was dangerous and destabilizing. The proposal challenged the established order. It could lead to competing power blocks and eventual war. The Council had maintained peace through centralized authority. Breaking that structure would create chaos. Kyle. Preston spoke for the first time, and his voice carried the weight of command. He told the Chronoxy ambassador that his opinion no longer mattered. The Empire had lost the right to influence galactic politics when they invaded Earth. The Admiral turned to address the Council directly. He stated that humanity would expand into the galaxy regardless of Council approval. Human colonies would be established. Human fleets would patrol their territory. Human strength would increase year after year. The Council could work with humanity or stand aside, but they could not stop the process. Another Council member tried to argue that this was aggressive posturing. The tone was confrontational and inappropriate for diplomatic proceedings. Surely humanity understood that cooperation required compromise. The galaxy had traditions and customs that had existed for centuries. New species typically integrated slowly into established systems. Rushing the process created instability and conflict. General Chris Donovan responded with blunt honesty. He explained that humanity consisted of survivors who refused to remain vulnerable. Humans had spent 10,000 years fighting each other because they had no external enemies. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet. They had nearly achieved self-extinction multiple times through war and environmental damage. That history created a species that valued survival above all else. The Chronoxy had demonstrated that alien threats existed. Humanity would never again allow themselves to be weak enough to tempt aggression. Helen stood and commanded attention through presence alone. She outlined exactly what would happen next. The Chronaxy would accept revised terms that included full demilitarization of their border regions. They would pay increased reparations over a longer period. They would share all intelligence about other potentially hostile species. In exchange, humanity would halt military advances into Chronaxy territory. The Empire would survive, but never again pose a threat to Earth. Next, humanity would open the Mutual Defense Compact to any species seeking genuine protection. Small civilizations that feared larger neighbors could join. Peaceful species that lacked military capability would receive support. The compact would grow into a major power block that could rival the Council itself. Finally, Earth was declaring itself a major galactic power effective immediately. Human ambassadors would establish diplomatic relations across the galaxy. Human interests would be protected through whatever means. Necessary? Thala asked, what would happen if the Council opposed these plans? Her crystalline form pulsed red with concern. The proposal challenged centuries of established governance. Other species might follow humanity's example. The entire political structure could collapse into competing alliances and regional conflicts. The risks were enormous and potentially catastrophic. Helen's response was calm but absolute. If the Council opposed humanity, then Earth would proceed anyway. The human race was not asking permission or seeking approval. They were informing the Council of their intentions. The galaxy could accept humanity as partners in creating better security, or they could be bystanders to the changes. Opposition would be noted and ignored. Humanity had learned that respect came from strength, not from asking nicely. The chamber fell into debate that lasted for hours. Council members argued among themselves about the implications. Some suggested accepting the situation while others demanded resistance. Smaller species representatives began asking questions about the Mutual Defense Compact. They were interested in protection that the Council had failed to provide. The political landscape was shifting in real time. Xiphus finally called for silence. The ancient being studied the human delegation with something that might have been respect or might have been fear. He spoke about how every civilization received the first contact they deserved. The Chronoxy had received the first contact they deserved through attacking. Earth, perhaps the galaxy, was receiving the humanity it deserved as well. He agreed to discuss the terms of this new arrangement and to accept that major changes were inevitable. Secretary Park nodded in acknowledgement. She stated that humanity looked forward to productive relationships across the galaxy. Earth offered partnership to those who wanted it and strength to those who needed it. The species that had almost destroyed itself through internal conflict was now offering to protect others. The survivors of countless wars were becoming guardians of peace through overwhelming force. On Earth, construction continued without pause. Shipyards produced new vessels every week. Colonies expanded throughout human-controlled space. Scientists developed weapons and defenses that would make future invasions impossible. Humanity had entered the galactic community, and they had entered it as equals who would never again be victims.